We're in Colossians chapter 3 today. Last week we talked about moving closer to Christ. This sermon's going to build on what we talked about last week. If you were unable to be a part of that, I encourage you to go to the website and listen to that sermon too. Moving closer to Christ takes faith. It can be scary to move closer to Him. I'm going to let that happen since everybody's focused over there. You're all going to miss what I was going to say anyways. Moving closer to Christ takes faith. It can be scary moving closer to Him because it always means we're moving farther away from something else. Maybe something that we enjoy, or something that our identity is all wrapped up in, or something that makes us feel secure. If moving closer to Christ means moving further away from the people or things that we've relied on, we're only going to be able to do that if we can trust God. Moving closer to Christ can at least initially make us feel less secure. And we hate that because security is one of our highest priorities. That's why moving closer to Christ takes faith. Moving closer to yourself, and when I say that, I'm talking about the person God made you to be, takes hope. And when I talk about moving closer to yourself, I'm assuming certain things. I'm assuming that you are not now the self that you were in the past, even 5 years ago. Nor are you the self you will be in the future. We tend to think, this is who I am. But who I am keeps transitioning. You have been in transition since you were in the womb. You didn't stop becoming on the day you were born, or the day you turned 18, or got married, or entered a career. Life moves from in utero to in cosmos to en Christo, from womb to world to Christ. And at each stage, we become more ourselves, either eternal splendors or immortal horrors. Moving closer to Christ takes faith. Moving closer to yourself takes hope. St. John says, what we shall be has not yet appeared. But when He appears, we shall be like Him, for we shall see Him as He is. That's the ultimate stage of our development. Everyone who has this hope, John says, in Him purifies himself, even as He's pure. So, for us, for Christians, it's different. We're not just driven into the future by mindless forces of the past. A Christian is drawn into the future by the loving plan of an all-knowing God. Your true self exists in that future. A self at peace within, with others, and with God. A self that enjoys life and is constantly grateful for it. A self that sees the enormous value in other people. A self that loves God with heart, soul, and mind. Last week, we saw that you can't move closer to Christ without moving away from something else. This week, we're going to see that you can't move closer to your true self without moving away from that misshapen, greedy, fearful, victimized person you've taken yourself to be. Remember what St. John said, everyone who has this hope in Him purifies himself. That is, moves away from the things that have no place in the person God's making you to be. To move closer to Christ takes faith. To move closer to yourself takes hope. To move closer to others takes love. As we move closer to Christ, we will find ourselves closer to our true selves. When we move closer to our true selves, we will become closer to other people in the church and out of the church. And once that process gets started, each movement amplifies and reinforces the next. So as I move closer to Christ, I'm closer to the person God intends me to be. And as that happens, I move closer to other people, which helps me move closer to Christ, which helps me move closer to the person I'm meant to be, and on and on. It's a spiritual chain reaction. Today's text helps us understand how we cooperate in that process. And I say cooperate because the new creation project is not our project. It's God's project. We get to be, by his grace and to our joy, co-workers with him. But it will always be his project. If we try to hijack that, we won't end up becoming the new self, but only a false self. And probably just a false front. And we'll miss out on being the person God intends us to be. So our text is Colossians 3, 1-17. Because what Paul says in these verses grows out of what he said in chapter 2, and because it leads directly on to what he says at the end of the chapter and the beginning of chapter 4, we need to look at what precedes it and then what follows it. And 1 week is not going to be enough to do that. So I'm planning on spending 3 weeks in this passage, Colossians 3, 1-17. I've just said that God is the architect and the designer of our true selves. Though he partners with us, he's the boss. When we forget that, we fall into the error of thinking that it's up to us to design and build the true self. But our design is always only a mashup of other people's ideas. And God has something much better than that for us. That kind of thing was happening at the church in Colossae. So first century influencers were speaking on how to become your truer, fuller self. And they shared fantastic and I think probably fictitious success stories and led the Colossians to believe that they could succeed too if they would only follow the plan. That plan included lots of rules and depended on a mind-over-body approach to life. So that's chapter 2, verses 16-23. What they were doing was telling people how to take control of the process, the new creation project that's going on in them. That temptation to take control is hard to resist. But it is God, not us, who's the architect builder of the new self. Conforming us to Christ's image was his project long before we got involved. When we hijack control of that project, we actually delay the changes that God is bringing about because it is obedience, not control, that is the key to success. Let me say that again because we are so tempted to take control. It is obedience, not control, that's the key to success. Now, it's not that we are to be passive any more than a construction worker on a job site is passive. We are on the job site. We actually are the job site. There's work to do, and the architect builder expects us to do it. But as we follow his plan, not ours, and especially not some ambitious teachers. Those first century teachers, they were so smart. Even Paul admits their ideas appear wise. The only problem, he says, is that they don't work. That's Colossians 2, chapter 2, verse 23. The shortcut to the true self undermines the entire project. So Paul warns the Colossians against these teachers, and he lays out a better way to move closer to the true new self. Now, I'm going to read that. It's chapter 3. I'll read verses 1-11. Since then, you have been raised with Christ. Set your hearts on things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. For you died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. Put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature: sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed, which is idolatry. Because of these things, the wrath of God is coming. You used to walk in these ways in the life you once lived, but now you must rid yourself of all such things as these: anger, rage, malice, slander, and filthy language from your lips. Do not lie to each other, since you've taken off your old self with its practices, and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge in the image of its creator. Here there is no Greek or Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is all and is in all. What could Paul have meant by "since then," and that could be translated, "if this is the case, you have been raised with Christ"? How have we been raised with Christ? When were we raised with Christ? I don't remember that happening. So what does this mean? Common answer is that this is a metaphor. This is a poetic way of saying that we experienced a change of status when we trusted Christ. And our status certainly changes when we turn to God and trust in Jesus. But our status changes because there is a change in us. When we respond to the message about Jesus with faith, a connection is established between us and him. And through that connection, God begins reorganizing our lives around Jesus' life. And so what happened to him 2,000 years ago, his death, his resurrection, his ascension, is being downloaded into us. But if I've been raised with Christ, why do I have no awareness of it? Well, that is hardly the only thing about you of which you are not aware. There is more to you than you realize. Now, Freud told us that a long time ago, and of course he was right, but he had barely scratched the surface. You are more than your body, more than your conscious thoughts, more than your subconscious thoughts. The you that you think you know so well is really a stupendous mystery, even to you. You are more than the sum of your past experiences. You're more than the product of what's happened to you on earth. You are the promise of what has and will happen in connection to Christ. The real you, not some metaphorical you, has been raised with Christ and seated with him. And that's because you have been linked with Jesus through faith. You think of a wireless connection with the internet. Your connection to Jesus is established by faith. The fulfilled you, the forever you, beckons you forward. People mistake that beckoning for hunger, boredom, sexual desire, ambition, but it is more enduring than any of these. To use a theological term, your soul's deepest longing is to be glorified. You can try to satisfy that longing with food or sex or success or sports, but it will always come back. And thank God that it does. The core of our being is constantly crying out for something more. It's crying out for completion, to be a completed man, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. That longing lies behind and outlasts every other desire. It is important that you understand that. There is more to you, and there is more to your neighbor than you realize. There are no ordinary people, C.S. Lewis once said. You have never talked to a mere mortal. It is immortals whom we joke with, work with, marry, snub, and exploit. Immortal horrors or everlasting splendors. God is calling us to become those splendors, people rich in joy, fortified with strength, guarded by peace. That is our destiny. Look at verse 3 now. The you that lacked connection to Christ has died. That reality is expressed in baptism. And your life is now hidden with Christ in God. Every Christian has a hidden life. And it's not just hidden from others, it's even hidden from us. Bonhoeffer says, though Christians are a visible society, they are always unknown even to themselves. Our lives are hidden with Christ in God, and we are in a cosmic game of hide and seek. The day is going to come when God calls all us seekers and says, "Ali, Ali, and free." That's how we used to say it in the neighborhood I grew up in. Everybody has their own way of saying that, and the saying goes back hundreds of years. But he will call us in. And when he does, we will find to our astonishment and our joy our true selves waiting for us. And that true self will be like Jesus. Now, this is far more than a game, but I refer to it as hide and seek because Paul uses that terminology. He says our lives are hidden with Christ, and we must set our heart on, that's NIV, but literally we must seek things above. Your true self, hidden with Christ in God, is one of those things above. But you need to follow the rules. You will never find yourself by looking for yourself. That is a spiritual snipe hunt. But look for Christ. Fix your eyes on Jesus, and one day you will discover, you will be rewarded with your true self. And what a reward. This is verse 4. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. This will be our coming out, the coming out of the ages. Notice that Christ is your life, not football, not work, not spouse, not house, not even church. If football is your life, the game of life will end in sudden death. But if Christ is your life, you will go on forever. That's why when I'm at the bedside, I did 7 years of hospice chaplaincy. When I am at the bedside of someone who loves Jesus, I can say, "Take heart, sister, you have your whole life before you." Christ's life is your life. You have been connected to him. He is closer to you than you realize. When you ask, where was he then when this terrible thing happened? The answer is, he was there in your life. He is your life. we're thinking about moving closer to Christ, to our true selves, to people in the church and people outside the church. We've already seen that moving closer to Christ means moving away from something else. Well, is that true of moving closer to your real self? It is. What do we have to move away from? Our false self, which we have thought of as our real self. Right? What a relief to realize that self-centered, self-promoting, posturing, fearful, irritated person is not my true self. Do you remember what Jesus repeatedly said, recorded in all the Gospels? It is the person who loses his life, literally his psyche, his soul, himself, for Christ's sake, who finds it. We see that movement away from the false self in our text. So, verse 5, Paul writes, "Put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly, the self that is not your true self, nature. Sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desire, greed, which is idolatry." Notice the word therefore. Put to death, therefore. Not in order to become something you are not, but to complete something you already are in Christ. Because that's true, put these other things to death. See the same motion away from certain things in verse 8. But now you must rid yourself of all such things as these: anger, rage, malice, slander, filthy language from your lips. You must rid yourself. You need to put off these things. Put them away, because they are fetters that bind you to an unreal self. See, we are not in a self-improvement plan. God did not send Christ to die a sacrificial death for the world so that you could be a little better than you are now, but so that you could be your new Jesus-like self. We're not improving the old self. We're giving it up. We're trading up for it on the wonderful self Christ died to save. Why does Paul say we must put away such things as anger and gossip and bad language and sexual immorality and greed? Are these things really that bad? When that question is asked today, more and more people are answering, no, they're not really that bad. Porn is okay. Sleeping around is okay. Filthy language is okay. That stuff is just natural. I know people who grew up in the church who are saying that kind of thing. And it just occurred to me that if somebody wanted to take clips of the sermon and then mash them all together, you could make anybody say all kinds of heresy. And those people, when they say it's perfectly natural, are right. It is natural for the false and incomplete self. But if you want to move closer to your fuller, stronger, peaceful, real self, you must move away from those things. You must lay them down or put them down. Paul's language, put them to death. You can't do that by moving towards some idealized self. You do it by moving toward Jesus. Your only hope of ever becoming your true self is becoming Jesus's true person. See, you aren't you without him. That is the great grief of not having Jesus. You also never find yourself. Seek him, and you will find yourself real, strong, full. But seek yourself, and you will only find a ghost, a shadow, a phantom. C.S. Lewis put it this way on the last page of Mere Christianity. The very first step is to try, he knows how hard it is, to forget about the self altogether. Your real new self, which is Christ's, and also yours, and yours just because it's his, will not come as long as you're looking for it. It will come when you are looking for him. Look for yourself, he continues, and you will find in the long run only hatred, loneliness, despair, rage, ruin, and decay. But look for Christ, and you will find him, and with him, everything else thrown in. How do I do that? How do I look for Christ? Well, coming here week after week or to some other gathering of Jesus' people is a good start. Thoughtfully reading Jesus' words and reading what the people who knew him said about him in the scriptures, contemplating what you've read, is a tried and true method. Practicing prayer, learning how to do it better, setting aside time every day in order to pray, that's helped millions of people. But the best guidance I can give you about how to look for Christ is to ask him. He's the architect builder. He knows what needs to happen next. Ask him. And keep asking, Lord, how do I go about this? How do I seek you? And then pay attention to the ideas that come to your mind. When he gives you an answer, act on it. And you will begin to see things happen. You'll begin to see a new self taking shape. All right, let's pray now.